showing you how to rebuild an oil pump. Now this particular one's off the Scout for an International 345. Most oil pumps are going to be very similar, maybe not in shape, but certainly in function. This particular one, and most of them you'll find, will have 2 gears sandwiched in there. Some of them usually just have one plate instead of having that plate and this other cover plate, but they'll just have one plate that does all this. Typically 3 to 5 bolts. You're going to take the 2 plates off. In this case I had 4 bolts. Take those off. Take the plates off. There's a couple of gaskets that we're going to be cleaning up. You can push the gears out. On this one, the oil pump drive, the drive shaft that would come off of the distributor is part of this main gear, rather than Chevys just have a short little stub and then a shaft that goes into it. Fords have the old small blocks. Same thing, it's got a little stub shaft sticking out that's a receiver, and you put a hex-shaped drive in it. And the other thing about this one is this collar. So this particular one uses a slot, so basically you could prime it with a flat blade screwdriver, you can turn it when you're trying to put the distributor in, whatever. But it uses this collar, and the collar gets crimped after it's in the pump into place, and you know, we're going to have to drive the old pump shaft out of the old collar so that we can install these. So that's the first time I've ever seen that technique or that method used, but big deal. You're going to have some kind of sealant. This is an O-ring that goes from the pump into the oil pump pickup. So we take that O-ring out. On the other end down here, you're going to have a spring, usually a washer, and then either a roll pin or a cotter pin that goes through the pump housing to lock those into place. And we had oil pressure. It's not that this wasn't working at all, it's that I'm cleaning up the engine, and while I've got it apart, it seemed silly not to go ahead, and I was going to just put in a new oil pump. They're $160 versus a $60 kit, and you'll see this is a very simple process. This is the new spring versus the old spring. There's a little bit more tension in it. The new kit comes with a couple of O-rings, which I'm sure one of them is for a different size oil pump pickup. And then it came with a new cotter pin. It comes with a roll pin, and I think the small O-ring and the roll pin probably go to this whatever other pump this system could work, because there's also about 4 or 5 gaskets in here, and we're only going to need 2 of them. So 2, we might actually only need 1. Yeah, because this is metal to metal here, so we really only need 1 of them. So this kit obviously fits a couple different versions of this same pump. Anyway, that's it. That's all the components of this oil pump, and I'm going to take it over, put it in a vise, hold it by the shaft here, or I'm sorry, hold it by the collar, and drive the shaft out of it real quick so that we can finish taking this apart. And then I'm going to run it out and just wash off the pump a little bit more. They soaked overnight in the parts washer, but I'll take it back out and kind of wash off the internal passages and stuff like that. But that's it. That's all of the parts involved here. And then once I get this out and washed up, I'll come back and we'll work with some clean parts and get it put back together. Next, just a little more cleanup. Get the old gasket material off here. This one doesn't have a gasket. Should make sure there's no high spots on it. And a little bit of the gasket got left behind on the housing. I'll go run a wire wheel over it, and then we'll flush it out one more time. Just to get all the little pieces of gasket and all that out of there. Same with this, and the other plate. I'll just wire wheel them real quick. I've got one on my bench grinder, so I'll just wire wheel these off real quick to make sure they're nice and clean. Alright, well, we're back from grinding wheel and flushing it a second time. And I think it looks real good. It's cleaned out. Now, if I was doing this for a customer who was going to be picking this up, I would take it out, put it in the blast cabinet, and I have glass in mine, so I'd glass bead blast it to make it look brand new. But it's going in my engine, and if it was going in a customer's engine where they weren't going to be actually picking up the part, I would do it the same way. I would just clean up the outside, get it all ready, and reinstall it. So the easiest way to take this off was to put this part on top of the anvil part of the vise, to hit down on it until it went past this, and that kind of straightened it out, and then put it in the vise with it just holding against the collar, you know, loose enough that it was holding against the collar but that the shaft could slide, and then tap down on the shaft until it came out. So didn't take very long. It was pretty easy. That pretty much takes care of the old parts. We're not going to be using those. I'm going to set them aside. Something I totally forgot to tell you about is the plunger that is behind the spring. So in this passage where the spring comes out and you take the cotter pin and all that out, there's this plunger in there, and I've seen them all different, you know, lengths and diameters and whatever, but basically it just restricts the oil flow inside this passage, and this is what the spring is pushing against in there to try and keep it seated. And then when your pressure comes up to a certain height, certain amount, based on this spring, then it overrides the spring and lets the pressure by. So as we go back together with this, there's not any instructions to speak of, but there are some cards here with the different shapes of gaskets, and depending on what, and then we have the bottom of the box was full of real thin gaskets, and depending on which one you're using, you know, it says use this with the identical shape mate. Using this gasket mate with the housing identical shape, this package has two gaskets 0.003 thick. Check space between the top of the gear with the gasket or gaskets in place to maintain that 0.003 minimum end clearance with the cover. And this says exactly the same thing, little different shaped gasket, and that our gasket is this one. You can see the passage here versus this one. So, but it's basically telling you, look, there's two of these gaskets in there that are 0.003 thickness. This had one gasket on it that I could tell. And what they want us to do is put this cover in place and check the in play on this shaft to make sure that when it's in there, there's at least 0.00, or we want exactly, it says 0.003 in play. So ideally what you would do is put it all together, stand it up like this, put a dial caliper up here, or dial indicator up here, and then move the shaft up and down and see if we get 0.003. I don't have a tool to do that in that fashion. So we're going to do the same process, but we're going to have to measure it with some calipers or something and see what we get. And we're just going to start with one gasket. These all go on dry, so it's, you know, it's not like you're taking stuff apart and putting it back together. And you're going to ruin gaskets. So first things first, we're going to install the plunger and the new spring and the washer. And we're going to put our new cotter pin in, and we got to put just a little bit of pressure on there to get that started. And very little. It's not going to take you very much pressure at all. And then we need to split that cotter pin. That's all there is to that. Get, pliers here. There we go. So that's installed. So that was all there is to that. The plunger's in. You can see it all the way back over here. So the next thing is to put the gears in. We're going to put just a little bit of moly lube, or assembly lube, I guess is what it's called, not moly lube. We're going to put a little bit of lube on here. And this or grease is really good for this kind of thing because it is sticky, essentially. So that gives us a nice lubricated feel on there. And then we're going to do the same thing with the pump drive shaft. And we'll put a little bit between a couple of the gears that are going to mesh. And on the face, well, I could have waited for later for that side. There we go. So the next thing is going to be to put a gasket and the plate on. Figure out which way it went. Plate. Once we've checked the in play, I'll come back and put Loctite on these bolts. And for some reason, this corner one out here now the idea is you want there's honestly like zero play in there. And it says we want to maintain a 0.003 minimum in play. I got nothing. Let's add a second gasket just to see if that's gonna make it feel any better. Actually feel it in there now, so let's see if we can figure out a way to measure it. Here's the deal. We're supposed to have 0.003 clearance minimum between the end of the gear and the housing plate. I just don't have any way to measure that here. I could take it over to a buddy who's got a machine shop. I could buy a dial indicator, but what it comes down to is with one gasket on there, I can feel it rubbing on the inside of the housing, on the inside of that plate. And it's not much, but I can feel it rubbing, which tells me I don't have enough clearance. Two, everything clears, and I have just the tiniest, I mean, like I can feel that it's moving, the shaft is actually moving. So it's not like I can add a third gasket because I don't have any more. The gaskets are, let's just measure a gasket. Inches, zeroed out. Gaskets are 0.003. I don't know if you can actually see that. Gaskets are actually 0.003. And I mean, I can see daylight between the two things. So to be completely honest, I don't think I have, really feeling it, I don't really think I have any more clearance than that. Before I could not feel the shaft move at all, zero in play, and now I know that it's at least moving. So I'm going with 2 gaskets. So on the Chevy and Ford pumps I've done, because this shaft only sticks out so far, you can measure between, you find a flat surface on here and pull up on it and measure and pull down. Sometimes it takes 2 people just so you can move the shaft around or whatever, and you can measure that in play with just a pair of calipers. And I've never had a problem doing that before with it this long. So with the pump drive being this long, that's what's causing me the issue today in being able to measure. This pair of calipers isn't long enough. I have a longer pair. Problem with those is that the battery is different, so I can't even steal the battery out of here, and the one in it's dead. So here's my caveat on this process. I'm basically trusting that what I'm feeling is at least 0.003 and doesn't exceed, you know, I'm quite certain it doesn't exceed, you know, 0.01. So I realize if you're measuring in that tiny amount is quite a variance, but the important thing here is if this was for a customer, if you're doing it for yourself and you don't trust what you're feeling, you could do the same thing. The options I have would be to get a battery from my other set of calipers and try measuring with that. To get a dial caliper and a magnetic base, and so you could come up and a dial indicator rather, and you could come up and measure that way. Or what I could do is take it down to the machine shop. My buddy owns AR Custom Machine Shop here locally, and he would have that magnetic base and a dial indicator, and we could check that in play. For me, for what I'm doing, I trust it. I didn't like the way it felt with just one gasket. I could feel it rubbing on the inside of that other piece, so I didn't want to trust that. But that's it. That's how it's assembled. That's how you should measure it. And I'm going to move on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull these bolts back out. I'm going to put some red Loctite on them, Loctite them down, and then I'm going to go ahead and torque them. These are only 5/16 bolts, so we're not talking very much torque. 10, 15 pounds is all it's going to take, you know, to keep this tight and not trying to over tighten it to where it starts flexing the plate. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll put this in an oil bath and spin it up with a drill. And once we know it's working correctly, then I'll crimp this on. I don't want to crimp that on until I know everything else functions the way it should, just in case we need to pull something back apart. Okay, we may hear the dogs barking because it's breakfast time for them. So we've got oil up to about this level. It's about 2.5 quarts of oil. It's new oil. Doesn't really matter. Good, you know, if it's real expensive oil, real cheap oil, that part doesn't really matter. All we're trying to do here is make sure we have fluid flow. And I will do my best to show you as we start to build a little pressure, but we're basically drawing oil in there, and then the oil is going to come out here, so seeing it come out is not going to be the problem. And I'm just hoping I don't make too big a mess. Yeah, we're going to make a huge mess. Alright, let's find a different bucket. This isn't going to work. Alright, I cannot find another container, but I wanted to show you guys the fact that it does have pressure, so we're just going to try and catch it and push it back in. See, so this one runs forward to run the drive. And you see that pretty constant flow there? Maybe. Oh, this is going to make a big mess if I'm not careful. So what we're going to try and do is just basically funnel the oil back in. You see, I needed a little more oil in the pan because it's drawing so much, it actually gets a little bit of air in it, so it's cavitating a little bit. But you can see the flow coming through that funnel, up into that funnel. And that's just at a pretty low speed, so we have good flow, no binding, so we're there. So I'll save this oil for doing the same thing, flushing out some other parts, getting things ready to go back in the engine. This pump is ready, so I'm going to get a Ziploc bag and put the pump in a Ziploc bag. I do have to put the collar on here still and put the O-ring in it, but that's real quick. But I'm going to put the pump in a Ziploc bag now to keep it from getting essentially dirty now that we know the pump works and it's ready to go back in the engine. Well guys, that's it for today's project. I want to thank you for watching. Hope you learned a little something on how these things go together. They're not, I don't know, they're not terribly mysterious once you've opened one up and looked inside. And that's how I did the first one. I knew I needed to work on it. And I think it was back in the 80s, actually the first time I ever messed with one. I know it was. My brother had a Camaro, like a 70 and a half Camaro or something, and we decided it needed a high pressure oil pump. Well, high pressure oil pumps were really expensive, but back at the time there was a couple of speed shops in our area, and one of the things you could buy was a high pressure pump kit, and all it really was a cotter pin and a new spring. And I can't remember anymore whether you need a stiffer spring or a lighter spring, but it would basically allow that valve, that shuttle valve, to move at a different time and getting you the pressure change. So we had the engine out and we tore the pump apart and put the new spring in it. And then back then you didn't even really, it's kind of like this one. You don't really have to take the whole pump apart. You just have to knock the roll pin out, pull the spring and everything out, change the spring, put the roll pin back in. Well, as part of that, we would take them apart and see how they worked, and that's how I learned. So they're a pretty simple machine that lets you, make sure the lifeblood of your engine is healthy. So, or the heart of your engine is healthy. So that's done. I'll put the collar on. I'll put the O-ring in the bag for later, just so I don't lose it. And now with the pump safely in the bag, I don't have to worry about it getting covered in dust. And I brought a second bag, so once I have this collar on there and put in place, then I can put another bag over it the other way. So, good, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned a little something. We'll see you again next week. Because I had one last thing to show you. So I reuse that oil whenever I put it in the container that I store it in. I always filter it. So there was some stuff in the filter, but this, I'm not sure you can see that, but against the yellow background you might get a pretty good view. See all the black stuff in there? This container was completely clean when we started. You can see all that black in the little bit of oil that's left in there. All that came out of our pump. That's another reason to test that pump before you put it in your engine, because all of that would now be inside your engine, in your bearings, in your oil galleys, whatever. And instead, we've caught it in here and we could throw it away. And when I was pouring that other oil into the other container, I filter that oil with a really fine mesh filters before I store it. So I know that oil is clean. When I poured it in here, the oil was clean. None of this in there. So it's all out of the pump. And I'd cleaned the pump 2 or 3 times before we assembled it. So just a lesson learned there. Thanks for watching. We'll see you.